After his crippling defeat at the hands of Lionel Johnson, the twisted and fearsome Konrad Curze remained a chained prisoner aboard the Invincible Reason. Despite his regeneration from the brutal spinal injury inflicted upon him during their last encounter, the Night Lord's Primarch was never fully cooperative. The Lion, seeking to gain valuable insight through Curze's gift of precognition, would visit him periodically, hoping to extract any useful information, which he would be able to aid the Loyalists with in their war against Horus. But time and time again, Curze only offered cryptic taunts and dark riddles, frustrating any attempts to use his visions for the good of humanity. As the Ultramarines, Dark Angels, and Blood Angels fleets, commanded by Reboot Guilliman, Lionel Johnson, and Sanguinius respectively, attempted to breach the Ruinstorm to reach Terra, the Night Haunter remained a prisoner. His chaotic mind was an asset that none of his captors were able to reliably access. Then Sanguinius experienced a vision, one that led him to believe his destiny would be found on the world of Davin, the infamous world where Horus Lupercal had first fallen to chaos. In an unexpectedly risky move, Sanguinius ventured aboard the Invincible Reason and took the chained Curze with him, intending to test the Night Haunter's belief in the inevitability of fate. As Sanguinius led Curze off the Dark Angel's vessel, the Primarch of the Blood Angels had to forcibly subdue the Dark Angel's guards in order to take Curze with him, much to the Lion's fury. The Lion, in his rage over the assault on his warriors, nearly decided to obliterate Davin itself by unleashing cyclonic torpedoes, an act that would have doomed the entire planet. But ultimately, the Lion, along with Guilliman, chose to follow Sanguinius and Curze to the surface of Davin, where they would face the cursed world together, in what would later become known as the Second Battle of Davin. The four Primarchs would venture into the Temple of the Serpent's Lodge, the very site where Horus had first turned to chaos. Here, Curze's conviction in every moment in fate being a fixed point began to waver. He had foreseen none of these events, and Sanguinius would turn to him and claim that destiny could indeed be changed, and showed himself to stand in dark contrast to everything that Curze believed in. The Night Haunter's dark certainty would then begin to crumble. The situation would grow even more dire as a massive demon known as Medal would appear and drag Sanguinius through a warp portal. For the first time in his existence, Curze showed genuine concern for his brother Primarch's fate. Strangely distraught, the Night Haunter confessed to Guilliman and the Lion that he had had no vision of how to save Sanguinius, admitting that his once terrifying and almost certain foresight had utterly failed him. As more and more warp-spawned demons erupted across the surface of Davin, Curze, overcome with despair, was dragged back to the Invincible Reason, where his usefulness seemed to wane further and further still. Following the Battle of Davin, the Ruinstorm temporarily began to dissipate, offering a clear path through the warp towards Terra. However, Horus's traitor fleets still blockaded the path. Then a new plan would be formed. Guilliman and the Lion would act in order to distract Horus's forces, while Sanguinius would race towards Terra. The Lord of the Blood Angels knew that his destiny and his final moments awaited him on the throne world. With this decision made, Sanguinius would take custody of Curze and transferred him aboard his flagship, the Red Terror. The plan was to bring the Night Haunter to Terra, where he would face the Emperor's judgment, but before reaching Terra, Sanguinius would make a drastic decision. Believing that Curze's prophecy foreseeing his own death at the hands of an Imperial assassin was an unchangeable fixed point in reality, Sanguinius declared that Curze must now follow his own path to that destiny. And despite having a potential vision of Curze being able to beg the Emperor for forgiveness and change his own fate, Sanguinius' own foresight allowed him to see that this outcome would be the worst one for humanity. To ensure that fate would follow in a way that would protect humanity, Sanguinius placed Curze into a stasis coffin, a method that would effectively halt time for the Night Haunter while he floated through the void of space. Sanguinius would proclaim that Curze's ultimate end at the hands of M. Shen, the Imperial assassin, would come when destiny willed it. Until then, Curze would drift through the cosmos, awaiting the inevitable fulfillment of his grim vision. In one final act of defiance, Curze would rage against his fate, but it was too little and too late. His protestations were in vain. Sealed within a stasis coffin, the Night Haunter was launched into the cold, endless void of space, as the Blood Angels continued their race towards Terra, leaving Curze to his fate, facing the long, haunting silence, which foretold his own demise. Thus, Konrad Curze, a figure of tragedy and terror, would be cast into the stars, his fate suspended yet unbroken, tied to the final stroke of an assassin's blade, a fate both foreseen and inevitable, yet unreachable for millennia. Following the closing of the Horus Heresy, Konrad Curze, the Night Lord's fearsome Primarch, cast into the void of space, Curze was left to await his prophesied death at the hands of an Imperial assassin. But the story of the Night Hunter did not end with his banishment into the stars. Years later, the coffin was discovered by an Imperial salvage ship, the Sheldron, as it traversed through the vastness of space. The crew was unaware of the dark, dangerous occupant within and chose to break the coffin's surface, inadvertently awaking Curze from his deathless slumber. But the crew was not alone. Hidden amongst their ranks was an assassin from the Caladius Temple, only known as Gun, who had been sent to eliminate the Night Hunter once and for all. What followed was a massacre, fueled by unrelenting rage, as Curze unleashed his misbegotten fury upon the Sheldron's crew, slaughtering all but 2 survivors, Gun, the assassin, and the lone crewman known as Elver. The assassin, though skilled and rather deadly, ultimately met his fate at the hands of the Night Hunter. However, before his death, Gun was able to alert the Caladius Temple of Curze's general location, setting in motion the events that would lead to the final chapter of the Night Lord's Primarch's fate. Elver, the only remaining crewman, could be said to have been spared by Curze, though not for reasons of mercy. Instead, the Night Hunter enslaved the man, slowly tearing away at the man's flesh for his own sick and twisted enjoyment, all the while forcing the mutilated human to navigate his ship and endure years of torment upon the hands of Curze's sick and twisted mind. The Sheldron, lacking a warp drive, was on a slow 4-year journey to the planet known as Sagasula. This was the last known bastion of the Night Lords. Through this arduous voyage, Elver became more than a simple servant. He became the Night Hunter's unwilling student, subjected to all of Curze's dark philosophies and nihilistic worldview. Over time, Elver gained a unique and disturbing insight into the mind of his captor. What he discovered was surprising. Despite his outward conviction, Curze harbored a deep-seated doubt about the truth of his own precognitive vision. Some of his visions had driven his actions and shaped his destructive beliefs in a predestined fate. Eventually, Elver came to realize that Curze's relentless brutality, his obsessive adherence to his visions, might have been born from fear rather than certainty. This revelation, however, would never see the light of day. Upon their arrival to Sangulsa, where Curze rendezvoused with a force of Night Lords under the command of Talos Volcaran, the Night Hunter took swift action to eliminate any potential threat to his dark legacy and his image. Fearing Elver's insight might undermine his authority or expose his inner turmoil, Curze ordered the Night Lords to kill his slave, ensuring that the very secret of his doubts would die with him. Having rejoined his legion, Curze's future remained uncertain, but his past continued to haunt him. His doubts about the truth of his visions cast a shadow over the man, once thought to be certain of his own fate, as the specter of his prophesied death loomed ever larger. The Night Hunter's final days became a haunting reflection of the darkness he had so long embraced. His life, marked by violence, fear, and a twisted sense of justice, would come to an end not through battle, but through the hands of an assassin, the very one he had foreseen. As it seems, in the end of the Siege of Terra and the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Night Lords did not follow the chaotic path of many other traitor legions in the retreat into the Eye of Terror. Instead, they continued their relentless campaign against the Imperium, carving out a reign of terror amongst the worlds of the eastern fringes of the galaxy. Yet beneath their veneer of defiance lay a troubling transformation. As the Legion exhibited signs of a self-destructive disposition, the Night Hunter's demise had a profound impact on the Legion, as Konrad gradually succumbed to madness and despair. Once a Primarch who commanded respect through his imposing presence and his razor-sharp intellect, Curze's sanity slowly eroded just prior to his final days. He often erupted into fits of violence and incoherent rants, exhibiting a sadism that deeply unsettled even his sons who were around him the most. Members of his inner circle, particularly Jago Sevatron, witnessed the tragic decline, their hearts growing disheartened alongside their leader's disintegration. Recognizing the threat the Night Lords posed, it seems the Emperor sought to eliminate them once and for all. In a decisive move, the Emperor's will dispatched the Caladius Temple of Assassins, with one of their number, known as Shen, eventually succeeding in the assassination of Konrad Curze. Following Curze's death, the Night Lords splintered into rival warbands, a fate all too common amongst those who willingly served chaos, as infighting consumed the Legion, leading to them eventually retreating into the Eye of Terror, where their number and capabilities steadily deteriorated over the millennia. By the 41st millennium, the once mighty Legion had fragmented over and over again, and with no clear leadership, several ambitious commanders vied for supremacy over their fractured forces. Despite the internal strife, the Night Lords have seemingly found a way to survive in this chaotic landscape, as they have become mercenaries, selling their services as elite shock troops to various factions within the Chaos Pantheon, and even to pirates raiding Imperial worlds, including the notorious figure known as Huron Blackheart. Their allegiance remains as ever fluid as water, often aligning with Abaddon the Despoiler, the War Master of Chaos, during his Black Crusade campaigns, as they seek to slake their own brand of bloodlust and vengeance against the Imperium. One of the Night Lord's most infamous raids post-Heresy occurred on the world of Scoundrel's Fall, located just a few hundred light years from Holy Terra. This brutal incursion would showcase their unyielding commitment to terror tactics despite their Primarch's essential fall from grace, and they displayed how their brutal tactics would continue to sow a legacy of chaos and cruelty throughout the galaxy evermore. As the Night Lords, they remained a testament to the destructive power and ambition of their Primarch. Their journey, though marked by their Primarchs, was now also marked by his absence. Some of the most notable conflicts that the Night Lords would take part in would be, first, the Eastern Fringe Genocide, which marked a dark chapter in the Imperium's history, and it occurred sometime during the late 31st millennium, in the aftermath of Horus's defeat during the Siege of Terra, as the traitor legions were driven into the Eye of Terror, seeking refuge from the vengeful forces of the Imperium. However, due to the Night Lords not following their fellow traitors, they, following their devastating losses at the Thramas Crusade, chose not to splinter or separate into warbands as of yet. Instead, they embarked on a coordinated campaign of genocide and terror against the Imperium, unleashing wave after wave of violence and brutality, which remains unparalleled in its macabre bloodlust. This catastrophic campaign was driven by a growing sense of self-destructive hatred that pervaded the entire Night Lords. It seems like they were suffering a psychological malaise that mirrored the inner turmoil of their Primarch. The Night Lords' rampage across the Eastern Fringe was largely characterized by acts of extreme cruelty and calculated terror, as they sought to instill fear and chaos amongst the Imperial populace. As their relentless assaults continued unabated, that is, until the assassination of Konrad Curze, and it seems that the Caladius assassin Shen essentially curtailed the Night Lord's reign of terror. Years later, in 832 M33, the Night Lord's dark legacy would once again rise up in the form of the Predilector, a chaos warlord who had once belonged to their legion. In a desperate bid for power, he forged a pact with the ruinous powers of the Warp, intending to ascend to the place of Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided. In order to appease these malevolent entities for his new immortality, he would orchestrate a horrific sacrificial ritual which claimed the lives of uncountable Imperial souls. Amongst these victims were Imperial Ministorum missionaries and members of the Adeptus Sororitas, all who were slowly and methodically sacrificed to the dark gods in a grotesque display of devotion. This macabre offering pleased the ruinous powers, granting the Predilector the dark apotheosis he so sought. Up next would be in 843 M34, when the Night Lords once again left their mark with the culling of Grendel's world, an event that saw the systematic extermination of the entire planetary population of Grendel, situated in the Yasulbul cloud near the far eastern fringe of the galaxy. Grendel's world fell victim to the Legion's brutal efficiency, as essentially they were used as a way to test new and methodical approaches to eradicating life on a planet. Up next would be in 220 M38, where in another harrowing chapter of vile maliciousness, a Night Lord's warband executed a devastating ambush against Chapter Master Orlando Furioso of the Howling Griffins at Eros Point. Under the command of the Predilector and his chosen, the Night Lords utilized a series of assaults from Deathclaw assault boats to board the Chapter Master's starship, ship, overwhelming the defenders and forcing them to evacuate using thunderhawks and drop pods. The battle would rage on the surface of Eros Quintus, where the elite forces of the Howling Griffins were faced with overwhelming odds. Chapter Master Furioso and the entirety of the First Company would fall in combat, marking a significant blow against Loyalist forces. In a final act of desecration, the Night Lords mounted Furioso's body on the prow of his Thunderhawk, transmitting its location system-wide. Eventually, the remnants of the Chapter Master would be discovered a month later by other Howling Griffin astartes, in a grim reminder of the brutality that the Night Lords had inflicted and would continue to inflict upon the Imperium forevermore. Then would come the event known as the False Saviors of Gragos. During an unknown date in M41, it would seem the Night Lords, in collaboration with the Alpha Legion, intervened in a conflict on the agri mining world of Gragos Entrenchment, which was on the brink of being completely overrun by the brutal Kurscherbach. This seemingly benevolent force, clad in colors and insignias of Loyalist Space Marines, would bring a fleeting sense of hope to the beleaguered populace and the struggling defenders. For several blissful days, the inhabitants believed that they had been saved from annihilation. However, once the orcs had been driven off, the grim reality had emerged. They had merely exchanged one set of oppressors for another, and the true malevolence of their new saviors would soon reveal itself, plunging the populace of Gragos into a far darker fate than that which the orcs had offered them. At another unknown date in M41, yet again a harrowing echo of history made itself known, when the Imperial frigate Hand of Mercy responded to a residual distress call from Grendel's world, which had been sent in the 34th millennium. Upon their arrival, they discovered the true horror, as they had been witness to the relentless brutality where every living human had been hunted down and their corpses marked with symbols which unmistakably identified them as victims of the Night Lords. Though the planet would later be resettled a century later and the massacre became a mere folktale, however, it seems that not everything was as good as it could be, since in the 41st millennium a second massacre would unfold in an almost exact mirror of the original. This horrifying reoccurrence prompted a full-scale crusade which was led by the Mortifactors chapter of Space Marines, who mobilized their fastest ships, seeking vengeance against those responsible for this atrocity. During an unknown date in M41, amidst a relentless tide of violence, the Night Lord's warmonger Avruk's wrath began to grapple with disillusionment. Growing rather wary of his indiscriminate slaughter, he vowed to embody the early ideals of his Primarch, seeking to punish only those who he deemed deserving of his wrath. Initially, this shift granted him a semblance of peace, as he engaged in acts of retribution and calculated severity, ensuring that none dare stray from the path of righteousness. However, his rather fragile moral compass would eventually shatter, leading him back into a maelstrom of mindless brutality, and within a standard year, he descended fully into chaos once more, enacting horrifying atrocities for offenses as minor as breaches of shipping contracts or even mispronunciation of High Gothic. Eventually, wrath madness spiraled into one which reflected the inseparable corruption inherent in the legacy of the Night Lords. Unfortunately, even this being their best chance for redemption was doomed for failure. At another unknown date in M41, the Night Lords would commit a series of audacious assaults led by Gilhost Vent, who executed crippling hit-and-run attacks on orbital way stations and macrofiber facelifts surrounding the notorious world of Chokehold. These raids were meticulously planned out and executed, allowing them to escape with vast quantities of ammunition and fully charged power units. Moreover, they were able to seize dozens of new recruits, further augmenting their ranks. The attacks on Chokehold exemplified the Night Lord's ruthless efficiency, despite being corrupted by the Siren Song of Chaos. Later, in 750 M41, in pursuit of the possessed Chaos cruiser Shadeblight, the Night Lords unleashed a wave of terror throughout the Ango subsector. Initially met with resistance from the Red Wolves chapter, the Night Lords would wreak havoc across the sector in a quest for the power that the ship would provide. However, the Red Wolves would ultimately succeed in thwarting the Night Lords' ambitions, denying them the prize they so desperately sought. The next event of galactic scale would be the Kazizan Uprisings. In 968 M41, the Night Lords would commit a rather well-calculated assault during the public holiday on the Imperial agri-world of Kahaizan, where the Night Lords, along with traitor planetary defense forces and numerous chaos cultists, ignited the Kazisan uprisings, exploiting the fact that over half of the planetary defense force was actively on leave at the time. The beleaguered world found itself besieged on all fronts. The cultists, aiming to harness otherworldly powers, attempted to summon demons to bolster their own ranks. However, due to Kahaizan's significant distance from the Eye of Terror and the outright lack of devotion from the Night Lords, the number of summoned demons was disappointingly small for the amount of sacrifice. Eventually, the Night Lord's Chaos Champion, Gorsmeth, led an attack against the 122nd Cadian Shock Troopers, commanded by Captain Fane. Utilizing warp magics, due to being aided by Chaos Sorcerer Azurmundurus, they were able to misdirect and incapacitate the defenders, culminating in a disastrous defeat. Captain Fane and his entire company would perish valiantly while defending an Adeptus Arbites precinct house. The stronghold of chaos over Kahizane was only broken with the arrival of the Imperial Fist, who were able to ruthlessly eliminate every last traitor and restore order to the world. At a later date in M41, a small flotilla of Night Lord ships would be able to navigate through the Cadian Gate, spending months evading detection within the warp. Their target was an unassuming planet known as Scoundrel's Fall, which had previously been attacked and resettled. Situated merely 100 light years from Terra and home to a significant Scholera Progenium Abbey, this world was a vital training grounds for the future Imperial military officers, along with Inquisitors, Commissars, Stormtroopers, and Sisters of Battle. After 7 days of relentless fighting, there would be no survivors left from the Night Lord's merciless assault, as the butchered remnants of both defenders and attackers were arranged in talismanic patterns intended to assist in the summoning of a demonic horde. This unleashed chaos would rampage across half the world, while the Night Lords made their escape towards the Eye of Terror, deftly avoiding the pursuit of Imperial warships, using the summoned demon as a distraction. The audacity of said assault sent shockwaves through the military structure of Segmentum Solar, resulting in the court-martial and penitent exile of Lord Commander Solar Jackson. In 999 M41, an event known as the Fall of Villamus would occur, when the notorious Red Corsairs, having struck a deal with a Chaos Champion known as the Exalted, led an assault spearheaded by a substantial Night Lord's warband against the lightly defended fortress monastery of the Marines Errant Chapter. Their objective was to seed a vast cache of gene seeds stored within the fortress monastery. Following a brutal conflict, the Night Lords and the Red Corsairs would turn against each other, with the Night Lords attempting to reclaim their strike cruiser known as the Echo of Damnation, alongside with all the recovered gene seed. This infighting was not only an example of chaos, but an example of what little respect the Night Lords held in the Red Corsairs, and it would cost them. The next, and potentially the most impactful event that the Night Lords would take a part in, would be the 13th Black Crusade, occurring in 999 M41, where in the climactic moment of chaos, War Master Abaddon the Despoiler launched his 13th Black Crusade, which aimed at facilitating a second invasion of Terra. As a part of this unified offensive, shock troops drawn from the Night Lords sowed terror all across the Sakuras sector, ruthlessly cutting communications and displaying the corpses of their fallen victims from every building within reach. The Night Lords would execute innumerable acts of terror, performing lightning raids and cunning feints to gradually dismantle Imperial defenses in the region. Even the most stalwart defenders of the Imperium, who maintained unwavering faith within their belief of the God Emperor, found their resolve shattering amidst the psychological warfare characterized by the Night Lords' operation. Amongst these incidents was a campaign of heretical transmissions falsely alleging that the Dark Angels chapter of Space Marines were in league with the forces of chaos. In part, this was due to utilizing knowledge gathered from the Fallen. Eventually, an Ordo Malleus kill team was dispatched to eliminate the source of these broadcasts, only to discover the fallen bodies of the Night Lords, serving as evidence of the Dark Angels' righteous fury at their honor being thumbed. During the same crusade, Chapter Master Alvaro of the Howling Griffins diverted his battle barge, the Sword of Destiny, from the larger war effort to pursue the Night Lord's demon prince known as the Predilector, seeking vengeance for the death of Orlando Furioso, millennia prior. In a titanic space battle, the Howling Griffins' First Company and the Predilector's chosen warband led to the victory of the Howling Griffins, as they restored their honor by banishing the demon prince back to the furthest depths of the warp. Meanwhile, the Night Lord's war leader, Chaos Lord Treka Darkblood, suffered a crippling blow when his Styx heavy cruiser was damaged by the Imperial Navy in the Fabrius Straits. Fortunately, a substantial force of Chaos warships eventually rescued the drifting starship and its enraged occupants, enabling the Night Lords to continue their dark endeavors unimpeded. Later, in M42, during an event known as the Empire of Fields, and in the aftermath of Cadia's fall during the 13th Black Crusade, the Great Rift unleashed a wave of panic and madness throughout the galaxy, one which allowed the Night Lords to thrive amidst the turmoil, with many Night Lords establishing small stellar empires in the star systems severed from the Emperor's light during a period known as the Noctis Athrena. The chaos and disarray became fertile grounds for the malevolent ambitions of the Night Lords, allowing them to further entrench the reign of terror across the galaxy. The Night Lords now had an opportunity to ingrain their legacy of horror unabated, as they entwined their fate with the relentless tides of chaos now sweeping across the Imperium. Eventually, in M42, within the shadows of the Cicatrix Maledictum, navigator guilds discerned a temporary channel of real space, leading from the Corinth system to the foreboding Imperium Nihilus. This was a rare opportunity which prompted several Imperial fleets to make haste as they departed to traverse this treacherous passage. However, unbeknownst to them, the Night Lords had orchestrated the illusion of safety within this region, their demonic pacts facilitating the perilous navigation for the Imperials. And as the Imperial vessels plunged within the Great Rift, the Night Lords chose the perfect time to assault them from all sides. Through a series of boarding actions, the Night Lords captured dozens of Imperial ships, leaving the fleets vulnerable to further predations and the onslaughts of chaos. In the early days of the Noctis Athena, as the Astronomicon's guiding light was essentially extinguished, plunging countless star systems into utter chaos, more and more warbands of the Night Lords chose to make their mark, both within Imperium Nihilus and Imperium Sanctus. Eventually they would be pushed out of Sanctus, however not before events such as the Taldas War. The Taldas system, home to the sacred shrine world of Benediction, would become a rather important focal point when the Dark Apostle Corferon of the Wordbearers Legion launched a brutal and devastating assault. He would enlist a large number of Night Lords warbands, including the notorious warband commanded by Chaos Lord Yaris Kine, in order to augment his force in this new Dark War faith. Positioned aboard the battleship Nightmare of Silinx, the Night Lords eagerly anticipated their share of the spoils of war, while relishing in the suffering they could inflict upon the pious followers of the Corpse Emperor. Before the Wordbearers unleashed their initial barrage upon Benediction, Yaris Kine's warband struck first, dispatching a kill team to the astropathic relay on the world of Starpool. Here they would butcher its unsuspecting occupants and detonate cyclonic charges all across the complex's core, obliterating vital communications arrays and essentially turning off most opportunities for them to contact the greater Imperium. As this heinous act unfolded, the Nightmare of Clinics emerged from the warp at the system's periphery. This accursed vessel held thousands of captured astropaths, bound to instruments of torment, overseen by the sinister warriors of the Night Lords, who would subject them and their wretched souls to horrific tortures, driving them into a state of perpetual pain-induced frenzy. Their psychic screams reverberated across the cosmos, disrupting long-range Vox communications and scrambling the minds of shipborne navigators. Imperial reinforcements would subsequently be dragged from the warp into the Tears of the Emperor, a blazing asteroid field at the Rimworld's edge of the Taldas system. There, more Night Lords lay in wait, poised to feast on the terror and plunder that awaited them. As the conflict escalated, they clashed with a contingent of Vanguard Space Marines from the White Scars chapter within this asteroid belt, in a relentless campaign of hit-and-run tactics, which both forces used, leading to a stalemate, further heightening the brutal nature of this prolonged struggle in the war-torn system. system. Eventually, during the Iron Crusade, an event known as the Second Relief of Mordian would occur in M42, as the Imperial forces executed a strategic withdrawal from the Stygius sector. Amidst an ongoing invasion, the Iron Hands chapter defiantly refused to retreat. Instead, they assembled on the besieged world of Mordian, which had fallen prey to relentless chaos assaults, accompanied by a meager contingent of Mordian Iron Guard. The Iron Hands sought to reinvigorate their purpose, determined to purge the perceived weakness that had marred their earlier performance during the campaign. During a critical juncture, the Iron Hands, bolstered by a cadre of allies, outraged by the perceived defeatism exhibited by Imperial forces, would act. Amongst these were reinforcements from the Brazen Claws, Fire Lords, Silver Skulls, Sons of Medusa, and Iron Lords. Together, they would form what was known as the Iron Crusade. Upon their arrival, they discovered the world of the Mordians was ravaged by a warband of the Night Lords, commanded by the malevolent Arhak Deathshriek and his ferocious raptor hordes. Deathshriek's insidious strategy involved using the terror inflicted upon the Mordian populace to fuel a chaos ritual capable of dragging the entire world into the warp. In a display of characteristic bluntness, the Iron Hands and their allies launched a surprise assault, emerging from the warp to engage the traitor fleet stationed in orbit. They initiated a daring drop pod assault on Mordian's capital, spearheaded by Clan Avrenai, led by Iron Captain Kenark Var. As Deathshriek relentlessly directed his chaos cultists against the Iron Hands, Var and his forces inflicted devastating losses upon their foes. One of the more pivotal moments would occur when Var confronted Deathshriek in single combat, inflicting grievous wounds upon the Chaos Commander. Despite their initial success, the Iron Hands would face a renewed assault from the Benedictine Guard and the Cult of the Whispered Word. The tide of the battle would quickly shift as renegade warlords across the sector united, recognizing the potential for the annihilation in its totality of the Iron Hands. The Loyalist assault began to falter under this mounting pressure as Darkshriek would proclaim victory and prepared to unleash the full might of his fleet upon the beleaguered Iron Hands in orbit, boasting an overwhelming numerical advantage of 3-1. However, the situation rapidly changed with the arrival of Iron Hands successor chapters upon the battlefield. Deathshriek's armada was caught off guard and in disarray by the Loyalist reinforcements, which caused them to face a catastrophic defeat. The newly arrived Loyalist warships unleashed orbital bombardments on Mordian's surface. While seemingly indiscriminate, it was far from chaotic in its execution. It followed the tactical doctrine known as Hammer and the Storm, which guided the Iron Hands' approach on the battlefield above and below. What appeared to have been a faltering advance was actually a calculated pause, allowing the Iron Hands tech marines to erect void shields and reinforce the capital city's remaining bunkers. Those in the capital, whom the Iron Hands deemed worthy of survival, weathered the brutal firestorm from above, while their adversaries, emboldened by the prospect of victory, had been rampaging across the streets, causing them to suffer devastating losses. Within the span of only one solar hour of bombardment, Chaos's grip upon Mordian was shattered. In the aftermath, additional reinforcements arrived from Crypta Mundi, enabling the Iron Hands not only to drive chaos from Mordian, but also to form a counterassault against the chaos garrisons on adjacent worlds, leading to the governing body of the Iron Hands, known as the Iron Council, to subsequently unleash a second phase of the campaign, aiming to eradicate the remaining chaos presence within the Mordian system and reclaim the vital refineries and orbital shipyards of the neighboring Carvos system. As this campaign unfolds, the Iron Hands and their allies wage a war not only against the forces of chaos, but one of retribution, determined to restore imperial order in the worlds that had been ravaged by the Night Lords. As the era Indominus dawned, the Night Lords were greatly benefited by the emergence of the Great Rift, and they greeted it with fervor. The Imperium Nihilus, now shrouded in an impenetrable darkness, severed from the guiding light of the Astronomicon, found itself vulnerable and isolated. Meanwhile, Imperium Sanctus temporarily descended into chaos and confusion, which all meant that it was fertile ground for the practical ambitions of the Night Lords' warbands. An atmosphere of anarchy, where the remnants of the Night Lords, having essentially devolved into a state of piracy and raiding, flourished in a manner previously thought impossible by the other Chaos warbands or the Imperium. Departmental Munitorum worlds were mercilessly stripped bare by midnight-clad marauders. Fortress monasteries, once bastions of strength, became targets for the Night Lords' incursions, resulting in the theft of gene seed and the systematic looting of armories. The defenders of these strongholds suffering unimaginable fates, often mutilated and ritually slaughtered in displays of cruelty that instilled fear across the galaxy for a resurgence of the Night Lords. Compounding this horror, Chaos Sorcerers of the Night Lords devised increasingly insidious methods to exploit the weaknesses of humanity, as they employed diabolical strategies involving the abduction and torment of thousands of astropaths. Through this unmistakable cruelty, the sons of Konrad Curze have seemingly mastered the art of psychological trauma in ways that their sire could never imagine, using said trauma to generate siren signals and further deceptive signals to mislead and ensnare stranded Imperial vessels. This dark art was now not merely a tactic, but a systematic approach to terror that the Night Lords would execute on a grand scale. Entire worlds would become grotesque monuments to suffering and despairs. Whole rooms would be filled with stitched bodies, floor to ceiling, screaming living beings, in horrific displays that would even make the Dark Eldar believe they had gone too far. Their campaigns of terror would inflict more psychological trauma on the Imperium than any other traitor legion, despite militarily being at a significantly smaller scale, establishing a legacy that will now span for eons. And as the conflicts of the Era Indominus escalate, and Dante's fleet nihilist begins to act with the collective power of a legion, it seems the frequency of the Night Lords' terror attacks would surge, reflecting their increasing unity as they were no longer just scattered, but consolidating their power warband by warband, rallying under a dark and dire cause. For if they don't, they will be met by forces equivalent to the legions of old. For the worlds of mankind, this cohesion amongst the Night Lords has heralded an ominous fate. The shadow cast by their actions looms larger now than it ever has, threatening to engulf entire systems in an unending night of despair and destruction. As their malevolence spreads, the grim reality has set in. The Night Lords are no longer merely remnants of a fallen legion, but harbingers of doom all their own, ready to unleash their horrors upon the Imperium.